それでは再開いたします。次のパネルディス
Let us resume it. The next panel discussion, Renewable Expansion continues. The moderator, Chair of Executive Board of Renewable Energy Institute, Thomas Coberio. Professor Coberio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. In the previous session, there were some concerns about security of supply when exchanging solar wind electricity with neighboring countries on a common grid. In this session, we're going to talk about how to decrease the supply risks from fossil fuels imported from the Middle East by instead utilizing clearly domestic solar and wind resources and other renewables. In this session, we have several speakers who are hopefully not going to speak more than 5-6 minutes each, so there will be time for discussion between them. We have changed the order of the speakers slightly compared to the program, and I will start by giving the floor to Mika Obayashi. The floor is yours.
Thomas, thank you for your introduction. 自然エネルギー財団の大場
I'm Obayashi from Renewable Energy Institute. I would like to discuss the situation in Japan and why we have to address these issues. This is from 2018, from a newspaper, The Guardian, from the front page. From climate change to climate crisis, we should change the terminology or language. The Guardian is changing the language. And this photograph, you may have seen this photograph. In the north of Alaska, polar bears gather after walking thousands of miles and come close to where people live and find food in garbage. And they are very hungry. And this is Greta Thunberg. She is a junior high school student, and she started a solo strike in front of a Swedish parliament. And there are also young people in Japan as well who are responding to her call and protesting. And there are abnormal weather that is causing damage, and this is now becoming new normal. This is now becoming a new daily lives, and 2 degrees may not be enough. IPCC has published a special report on 1.5 degrees. And in order to avoid excessive emission, if we adopt such a scenario, it means that we have to have renewable energy account for about 50 to 60% of electricity by 2030, according to IPCC recommendation. And based on such recommendations, various countries are increasing their target to more ambitious level from more than 40% of electricity to be supplied by renewable energy by 2030 to 74% in case of Spain, and by 2030, and in the United States, in the state of California and Hawaii, 100% by 2045. More ambitious targets are now being set. And a 1.5 degree report or 2 degree report, in order to achieve that, we have to massively increase the share of renewable energy, especially wind and solar. PV will have to be important source of electricity and resources of for electricity. And what is attracting attention in Japan is utility scale electricity, offshore wind. As you see here, in Japan, average capacity factor of offshore wind is now 45 to 50% in some of the regions in Japan. So that is the amount of resources of wind that we have. And as you see here, it's very easy to understand. In 2040, in each country, in each region, this is the projected electricity demand according to IEA. And this is compared to technological resource availability of offshore, and 90% can be covered in Japan. So we should increase the use of renewable energy on a massive scale, and we have to make a very large transition to renewable energy. And as it was discussed in the earlier panel, transmission grid has important role to play. This is a future, but not far into the future. This is a near future, and there is also signs of energy transition in Japan. This is from last year, and how much renewable energy is reaching each area in Japan, the maximum ratio and the time slot is shown. And nationwide, already 62%. Some of the countries had as high as 62% supplied by renewable energy. Tohoku, Hokuriku, Shikoku, Kyushu, especially Hokuriku and Chubu and Kyushu, have a large amount of renewable energy. On some days, 76% or 80% is supplied through renewable energy. And in Kyushu, it's sometimes 100%. And this is due to mainly PV generation that is increasing. And in reality, in some of the days, a large percentage is supplied by renewable energy. From Bloomberg, we heard from Ms. Kurosaki in the beginning of the symposium today, the price of PV and wind is coming down substantially. And this is from our Renewable Energy Institute, according to a researcher, Kimura-san. And overseas, there are optimized technologies that is used. And by introducing such technologies in Japan by 2030, in case of an international convergence case, it will be about 5 yen per kilowatt hour. And when I speak about this with European friends, they say that they're already 5 yen per kilowatt hour now. But PV generation cost will be as low as 5 yen by 2030. So that's a huge positive. And we have to think about how to use or increase the use of renewable energy, which is a huge challenge. And Ms. Kurosaki discussed such topics as battery. And we also have to have the use of efficient, coordinated transmission grids across the regions. And this is an international interconnection in Europe. And people often say that because Japan is island nation, it's difficult to increase interconnection. However, let's say that we juxtapose Japan on top of Europe, Sweden, Norway, Germany, Belgium, Denmark. The area of Japan or capacity of electricity is equivalent to these countries put together. So we can readily do things in Japan now. And by expanding the interconnection, there is a bigger potential. And the current status in Japan is that, well, for example, at Agora Energy Vende, Area International Grid, with these organizations, we conducted joint research. With the current electricity system, we can increase the ratio of renewable energy to 40% in Japan. Of that, 30% can be variable renewable energy. And so that is the result of our joint research. By 2030, 40 to 50% should be renewable energy, and by 2050, 100% should be renewable energy. And that is the target. We believe that should be the target for renewable energy. And interconnection or global grid can be an important tool to achieve these targets.
Thank you. That was an enormous amount of information in 7 minutes. I hope you managed to follow. The next speaker is Kaisuka Izumi, who has contributed to many of our conferences with updates on especially solar development in Japan. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So 5 minutes now. I'm under pressure, so let me just start my presentation. So from me, I participate in PV, statistical information, the business information analysis is conducted in the IEA PVPS, and also I would like to share with you some of the results of international activities looking at the PV market. What is the current status internationally? And here in Japan, what's the potential of the introduction of PV? If you look at this graph on the very first page, it looks at plotting the annual introduction volume worldwide. I'm part of the IEA PVPS. At the end of 2018, 525 gigawatts. This year, more than 100 gigawatts will be introduced. By the end of 2019, more than 600 gigawatts. 0.5 terawatt has been exceeded from the era of gigawatts to the era of terawatts. Now we already see that happening. Having said that, 512 gigawatts, how much of that is contributing to the electricity? If you look at the global average, 3%, just 3%. If you look at Honduras, 10% is supplied by PV. That's one example, but globally, as a power source to be the leader of decarbonization, PV really has a long way to go. Here in Japan, 6.8%. 6.8%. If you look at this, not the accumulated introduction, but per year in 2017, 2018, 100 gigawatts. By 2018, the Chinese market, they are contracted, but other countries sort of complemented, and 2 gigawatts increase from the previous year, reaching 100 gigawatts. But in other areas, why PV enjoyed so much growth? As from Bloomberg Energy Finance, Kurosaki-san and Obayashi-san mentioned, LCOE of the PV, LCOE has come down significantly. In Middle East, with good radiation, solar radiation, the sales price is around 2 cents per kilowatt hour. 2 cents per kilowatt hour has already been realized. Middle East with good radiation has seen this kind of an example. We can't draw a comparison to a country like Japan, but look at Germany. In the very recent bidding, 6 yen per kilowatt hour, 4.99 euro cents. So just about 6 yen. The FIT in Japan, very recently, the very lowest bidding price was 10.5 yen. So compared with Germany, here in Japan, the PV sector again has a long way to go. So what's going to happen in the global market? We participate in PV Market Alliance. It's kind of an international collaboration framework of a research company looking at the global market scale. These are estimates or the forecast. 2019 and beyond, there's going to be introduction of 100 gigawatts or more. So perhaps the introduction before 2025, it might reach 1 terawatt. So what about Japan? What about Japan? Thomas-san is managing time, so I can't really dwell on details. So if you could just download this from our website at our company, looking at various sectors, we accumulate the demand and how much PV introduction can be expected. We did the analysis, 2030, 130 gigawatts, 150 gigawatts is possible. So to that end, what's required? Again, you can download that information from our website. Please take a look at it at your leisure if you're interested. But for these numbers to become a reality, there are some issues. As I shared with you before, Japan's PV production cost is still high. How best you can lower the production cost? And post-FIT era, what's the kind of business model that you can create? I think those are two important things. My last slide. So I would like to spend the rest of my time on this. There's a representative from NREL and Japan's the ICE and Fraunhofer ISE. The 3 institutes are collaborating on the terawatt workshop. From the very first one, as a PV analyst, I have been invited and I've been participating in the discussions. The various institutes have their own forecast, but more than expected, if you look at the introduction of PV, they are likely to be accelerated. That's part of our understanding. Having said that, to realize that kind of an introduction of PV, there are several very important topics. Actually, there are 5. First, in a wide area, the grid and power electronics technologies to match generation and consumption in wide area. The international grid connection is part of this, and obviously storage and sector coupling. And in the final analysis, and power to X and power to gas technology to produce, store, and use of hydrogen, CH4, and other hydrocarbons. That's part of the conclusion. Variable energy source, to integrate that to the grid, you need to utilize various solutions. So what's important is that benefits to the society. After validation, the investment will follow. I think that's what's expected in today's discussions. Various benefits of international grid connection has been raised and expressed. I think there should be more discussion, more momentum in Japan. That was mentioned before, and I agree with that. So going forward, for Japan to introduce more renewable energy, I understand there are some constraints, but together with all of you, I would like to keep making efforts to actually tackle these barriers and obstacles. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you. And solar PV installations is the renewable energy where Japan is competing with Germany and the United States are being second after China in installed capacity. So Japan is doing well in installations, but not quite so well in bringing down the costs. So that's our main challenge. Thank you. Now we go on to SB Energy, one of the companies that are actually building the solar plants in Japan. Sato Yasuharu, General Manager of SoftBank Energy Corporation. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm from SB Energy Corporation, the Strategic Business Division, Northeast Asia Business Department. So I'm a little different from the other speakers. We are a company that does the actual power generation business. Our renewable energy expansion strategies and approaches is what I'd like to address today. So this is the makeup of my presentation today. I'd like to talk about what we've done up until today in terms of power generation development. And then after that, today's theme, renewable energy and the expansion of that, what we are doing at our company. There are 3 points that can be raised: Asia's supergrid concept and virtual power plant approaches and the hyper-accurate real-time weather forecast system and the leveraging of the system. So I'd like to talk about these 3 points. SB Energy, that's our company. In 2011, we were established, and since then, natural energy penetration is what we have aimed for in our promotion of the power generation business. SoftBank Group, as is shown on this line, natural energy is what they have pursued. They have conducted various businesses which provide the platform of the use of renewable energy. Solar and wind development is what we have done. In total, 722 megawatts have been developed. The red portions are solar, and the blue shows the wind. We have 464 megawatts in operation. Under development are 258 megawatts. And furthermore, overseas business in Mongol, renewable energy business is what we do there. Wind power generation business that That's 50 megawatts. In the Gobi Desert in Tsetsi in Mongolia, there's a site, and wind power generation plant in 2017 in October we started operation. And in addition to that, 2 gigawatt of renewable energy project development is what we are studying at the moment. And in addition to that, solar and wind hybrid power generation development is what we're doing, and the 500 megawatt project is one for which we are conducting a feasibility study. And next, renewable energy penetration to expand. We're doing different things. The Asian supergrid concept in 2011 in September, this was announced, and our company as a SoftBank group, clean and cheap renewable energy and a stable supply would be possible through Asia Supergrid. So we are also aiming for the development of this, as has been presented earlier. China, Korea, and those concerned are involved, and we cooperate with them. And in particular, transmission routes. We are doing actual surveys on the transmission routes, and this is our track record. In 2016, August, we completed the pre-economical calculation of Russia-Japan route, Mongol, China, and Japan-Korea route. In 2017, in March, we completed the pre-feasibility study with the China State Grid and with KEPCO and the SoftBank Group. We have jointly performed this, and this has been completed. And last year, in September, we completed the desktop study on China-Korea route. This is a desktop study, marine study. And in April of this year, we completed the desktop study on Korea-Japan route, along with KEPCO. The Asia Supergrid has key factors for realization, and that's technology, economics, and politics, law, and regulations. And of this, with regard to technology and economics, this is fully feasible and doable. That's the conclusion. What remains is the intergovernmental talks, rule-making. This is an area which proves to be the greatest challenge. On VPP, virtual power plant, renewable energy introduction as this expands, one of the challenges is output suppression, and that's one of the major challenges. In order to resolve this issue, renewable energy power plants and the distributed power source or storage batteries and electric automobiles, by combining the IoT to deem this as a power plant. That's the virtual power plant. And we've been working on the POC since 2016. The VPP, when this materializes, we can avoid output suppression. Renewable energy expansion will be something that this would contribute to. Lastly, hyper-accurate real-time weather forecast system. On this, ClimaCell, it's a U.S. Meteorological venture business, and in April of this year, we have made an investment. This company provides services, wireless communication, satellites, IoT devices, and drones. From the communication status, pinpoint, on-demand, high-accuracy meteorological information can be provided using all of this. And as to how this is to be leveraged for effectively using renewable energy, highly accurate power generation volume prediction is very important. ClimaCell, highly accurate meteorological information would benefit the renewable energy power generation companies and transmission companies, and wide area companies would be able to use that so that they can use maximum use of renewable energy. And so we are working on this as well. SV Energy is working with BITS, AI, and IoT, Watts, a renewable energy business, and then storage batteries, leveraging mobility. In these three areas, we aim to become a platformer and platform and service provider. We want to create a new business model through this. So going forward, we will move and conduct activities based on this approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Clearly the necessary part in this development, those who actually make the investments and create the conditions necessary technologically. Thank you very much. Now we're going over to the international guests, and first Douglas. Douglas Arndt is with the American National Renewable Energy Laboratory and will talk a bit about how to integrate a lot of renewables into the grid with economic benefits. The floor is yours, Douglas.
Wonderful. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for the microphone. Excuse me. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's very nice to be here. I'll go very, very quickly and talk about some principles that we've developed over many years with many international partners in an organization, an effort called the 21st Century Power Partnership, which is an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial. Includes all of these countries down here as principal participants, but it reports to all 23 participating countries in the Clean Energy Ministerial, and all the information is available openly and publicly on a website. And there are three example publications here that we have released of many, maybe 20 or so, and I just want to highlight some principles for integrating renewables, all which are backed up by thousands of other studies, very technical studies, including grid integration studies, which I'll show you an example of. But I will focus on just some efforts relative to the interconnectivity and efforts of unleashing flexibility to integrate renewables today. So a number of years ago, we actually published a report. I think it still stands very accurately as best practices for integrating renewables. I encourage you to find it online. And in that, at a very high level, speaking to ministers in particular and leaders, there were 5 actions to be taken. And I will show you these in a bit more detail. And they are actions to be taken in a coordinated way. They include leading public engagement because it's a stakeholder-driven process. Very importantly, expanding resources, which we will talk about in terms of transmission, rules for markets, also very pertinent to the last conversation if you're thinking about inter-country connectivity, but more importantly, also in your country. How those rules evolve are very critical to enabling the integration of renewables. For example, allowing other generating plants to ramp, or enabling demand response to participate in the market, or encouraging some of these other cross-sectoral capabilities, et cetera. So you can see this, and you can see a bit more detail here where we've actually outlined as a function of the penetration level different phases of action. And this is actually articulated in even more detail in a couple of follow-on reports called the Status of Power System Transformation that we have released with the International Energy Agency over the last 3 years. So I encourage you also to look those reports up as well, and it articulates these in more rigor and more detail going forward. And you can see that there's a variety of activities. Everything from the system operation element, including short gate closures, utilizing best-in-class forecasting capabilities, et cetera, but also about transmission expansion, broadening the geospatial base of renewables, and also making changes to the market rules, very important elements, again, of enabling power systems to balance, including all of the renewables and, frankly, taking them as a first-come resource. Unleashing flexibility is absolutely critical. So modern power systems have more degrees of freedom to obtain real-time balance and real-time reliability and security. And this is a notional graph that has been, I think, repeated and revised by many other organizations, but this is just I'll call it an element of what are the components that you can think of for unleashing flexibility. And as a notional element of cost, the lowest cost elements are actually in system operations and in markets. However, these are mostly the difficult political economy ones that you have to work through the conversation and the market rules. Most people think of technology, storage. Storage is not a silver bullet. It may not necessarily even be the least cost element, but it might be the simplest to implement because it doesn't require market and rule changes. But these market and rule changes are incredibly important. And networks are important, but also expensive and also take 10 to 15, possibly 20 years to develop, depending upon the rules and the investment requirements, et cetera. Load profile and flexible generation are two other elements. Dimitri, we might talk about these as well. Very important components. All of these are tools in the toolkit to be used. So it's not a single one, it's all of them in some portfolio. And here I just show you the results of, if I can get it to work, let's see if it will work. No? On this computer? Yes. So this is a video of many thousands of hours of computing code where we simulate both the Eastern United States grid and the Western United States grid digitally put together in 5-minute intervals in both day-ahead markets and real-time markets for every generator and every transmission line. And these are done under simulation of 2030 timeframe for 30% renewables. And this capability allows us in 5-minute intervals to calculate if the grid is meeting demand reliably in every 5 minutes of the year going forward. And we use these studies as very, very strong, I'll call it simulation evaluation tools to calculate the system operation elements, and then to complement them with stability studies, and more importantly, to actually look at the economics, to look at the requirements for transmission needs, and to look at where power may flow from one location to another. And hopefully it's intuitive here with the yellow in solar and other pieces. So I encourage the use of these studies, which are increasingly becoming open source, using best-in-class quality data and tools, and encouraging work throughout that. So I'll welcome conversation during the comment period, and encourage everyone, as I think this audience well knows, to inform decisions through science and good engineering. Thank you.
Thank you. Just that simulation clearly illustrating the value of a grid so that electricity can be exchanged between different regions depending on time of day and consumption patterns. Now we will go to Dimitri Peskia, who is with Agora Energiewende in Germany, an organization or a think tank that is surveilling, checking, and supporting the transition of the German energy system. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure again to be in Tokyo and discuss about the evolution of the German power system transformation and the growth of renewables. I already had the chance to say it, I say it again, the key insight of the German energy transition is really key technologies, solar and wind energy. And you see on this graph, we stand today in Germany with 38% renewables in our system. The target is 65% by 2030, and most of the growth will come from these two technologies, wind and solar. Today, we have 120 gigawatt installed capacity in Germany for a peak load, which is about 80 gigawatts. So you have some hours of the year where obviously most of the load is covered by renewables. the good news is that the cost of this strategy is about to peak. The cost on consumer will start to decline as of 2021 because the costs were expensive in the past and they are cheap now, so we will see a cost decrease. The bad news is that the development of wind is slowing down. So there is still challenges in bringing the system to these high shares, but there is policy measures which are needed and implemented. So the first one is, I think, an important takeaway. Renewables are now fit for the market. The costs have decreased. The priority in terms of system design and support scheme is to bring them being more market and system friendly. So we are moving away from a feed-in tariff system to a system with incentivized market response and system integration. The second important takeaway, since renewables are market ready, the markets must be renewable ready. And this is important, it's the key narrative of the European power market integration. It's to create competition between technologies through market and price signals. And this market needs to be short-term, close to real time, because renewables are variable. They cannot be predicted accurately in one day, but they can be predicted accurately 5 minutes or 15 minutes before real time. So the whole market structure needs to move close to real time, shorter products, and also must be in broader geographies in order to benefit from smoothening between output and between loads. So markets must abate inflexibility and really give to the price signal an investment and dispatch nature. The third takeaway, in order to integrate renewables, we must abate the inflexible part of our system. And an important inflexibility is the old coal power plants. So Germany has adopted a coal phase-out plan with an end date to coal for 2038 at the latest. It is a plan which answers a climate concern, but it is also a plan which supports renewable integration as to make room for more flexible technologies in the system, including gas, power plant, a demand-side response, and other flexibility options like storage in the long run. And my last takeaway, and it is related to the topic of this symposium today, is the cross-border system integration. I think Europe is actually a success story when it comes to the integration of our markets. And as a matter of fact, we have a target in Europe. By 2030, every country needs to have 15% of its load being interconnectors. This would mean for Japan, if Japan would follow similar rules, by 2030, Japan should have about 20 gigawatts of interconnectors with neighboring countries. This is important because it allows to benefit from different regime in renewable. We have always somewhere wind which is blowing in Europe. So connecting system through infrastructure, but most importantly, connecting systems through similar operational practices will allow the integration of renewables at lower costs and guarantee security of supply to the benefit of end consumers. Now, grid is important between countries, but it is also important within the countries. And here there is still some work to be done. I believe also in Japan, but in Germany we have some grid constraint in our country. So we need to reinforce the grid, but also think about good incentive and clever design in order to make this infrastructure really a leverage for renewable energy integration. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. And Germany, to a large extent, has been the laboratory where things have been tested the first time. We can learn from their success stories and also from their mistakes. So it's nice that you share your experience. Now I would like to have all the speakers on the podium. And we do have, thanks to speakers being very good in keeping time, 20 minutes for a discussion. And first, in Mika Obayashi's introduction, she mentioned the projections of potential for offshore wind, much larger than current consumption. And we had others who referred to the opportunities of using renewable electricity to produce hydrogen, for example. And Douglas talked about what you can do in the short term to manage a lot of renewables. But what I would like to have comments from some of you on is, what do you think of going all the way, of really using all these potentials for solar and wind and producing much more electricity than the current electricity demand, and use the surplus to produce hydrogen and other fuels to substitute fossil fuels in other sectors outside the electricity system? Wouldn't that make it much easier to integrate a lot of renewables, because you would have consumers of electricity who would produce fuels that could be stored, and those consumers of electricity would be very price sensitive and stop producing if there was a shortage. Do you want to start on that, Douglas?
Is this working? Yes? Okay. I'm happy to answer the question. I think the succinct answer is those other technologies offer additional options for flexibility and therefore help enable greater contribution, participation of renewables locally as well as regionally. Now, to peel that answer a little bit, I think it's important to go back to actually Mika's presentation to understand the sense of deep decarbonization that must be achieved in a relatively short time frame, and that decarbonized power systems are principally at the center of a decarbonized energy system, and that using these clean electrons, for lack of a better way to say them, to produce fuels, to store electricity in other sectors or to support other sectors is actually critical to the forward thinking and the forward solutions going forward. And it's opportunity that's very much a part of our strategy and our thinking, where we include power to X, or electrons to molecules, as an element that's critical to the going forward pathway. The only other piece I will mention, because it was missing from the conversation in terms of scale, is that another part of our strategy is very important, is to think about material recycling. So we cannot completely continue to do resource extraction and grow to terawatts of PV or terawatts of wind with those technologies having 25 or 30-year lifetimes, without principally thinking about circular economy elements as well.
Thank you. Good point. Sato-san, you showed a slide of SoftBank Energy's investments, where Bloom Energy, a fuel cell producer, was one of the early investors. Is that a part of the idea of producing hydrogen from renewable electricity and then back to electricity as a way of balancing the system?
Right. Yes. On that businesses, yes, Bloom Energy is doing that. And so that we can expand this further, we would like to do that in the future.
What do you think of this potential for Japan, and how to integrate these enormous amounts of available offshore wind in Japan, for example?
先ほどお見せしたように
As I showed earlier, it has a large potential. Offshore wind has a large potential. So what we're using in terms of demand, if we think in these terms, China has a lot of demand. In Japan, we will have extra power, which will be covered. 900% is the coverage of offshore wind. So this kind of energy, well, when we say renewable energy, 100%. In terms of power, 100% renewable energy is possible, and as much as possible to increase renewable energy and in that we create the hydrogen, and we can use hydrogen in various forms or in other ways. But what we have to pay heed to is the fact that the government has a 2030 target or the 2050 target, and these targets are not very clear in terms of use of renewable energy. Generation of hydrogen, is that coal-based, and technologically, will there be a path found for this? What we see before us in terms of renewable energy will not be expanded. So we should not use this as an excuse. Renewable energy and maximum utilization of renewable energy, we have to work on that. And in doing so, 2030 target, 22 to 24%, we have to aim for a much higher target internationally or in terms of Japan's industry. That is what the situation calls for, much higher than 22 or 24%.
When we have talked about interconnections between countries, when we have talked about flexibility, it all comes down to actually seeing what the marginal cost of electricity generation is via a market price. And Dimitri, you talked about the importance of price signals, but we're quite far away from that in Japan and China and Korea still. What do you think are the important basics and basic policy measures to get this working in practice?
Well, first of all, I think there is some places in Japan where the situation is not so bad. We went in Kyushu yesterday, and I was surprised to see that coal power plants are ramping up and down quite flexibly. So they answer and respond to some signal. This signal may not be a purely liberalized market where you have a lot of competition, but there is something that the operator take as a signal to decide to ramp up and down. And this has a consequence, it lowers the curtailment level. Now, there is still a high level of curtailment because there is other flexibility which should respond to the similar signal. And this is where market play an important role, especially if this market can adjust really to shorter product and being close to real time. And this is where I think Japan still needs to continue to progress in the level of each EPCOs, but most importantly, I think between the EPCOs, being able really to trade, allocate the interconnectors and allow any technology to compete in a fair manner. And this includes renewables, because renewables, they can provide also not only energy services, but they can also provide, energy output. They can provide services, which are also important for the integration, ancillary services or others, which can also be traded through markets.
But flexibility among producers has always been pursued because they have been adjusting to various demands. But the important thing that we need to develop, if this is to be really economically efficient, is flexibility among consumers. And then they must see the market price. Douglas.
If I may, just the principle here, I think there are two. One is that while some electricity is being traded in a market here, it's not all. And the movement to essentially a fully functional broad, i.e. across as much of the country as possible and deep as much of the power being traded in a market will or should enable lowering costs and the integration of more renewables. That's one. The second is that those market signals in the wholesale market are best reflected also in retail tariff structures, which I believe are still not fully under development here. So in the United States, for example, there's everything from peak pricing to almost real-time time of use rates. And all of those give a market signal to consumers who may choose very frequently to either introduce energy efficiency measures to reduce their overall load or choose technologies or working with other service providers to shift their load to avoid high prices.
Exactly. Thank you. Izumi-san, how would you explain the difference in cost of producing solar electricity in Japan compared to Germany, for example?
先ほど申し上げました
As I mentioned earlier, in Germany, the recent bidding auction gave a result of 6 yen per kilowatt hour. In Japan, that's 10.5 yen. And the largest difference is the X. The investment cost is where the difference lies. In Europe, the mega solar, the power generation, power plants for power generation is under €1. And if there's a competitive project, 65 euro cent per watt is what construction can be done for. But we haven't caught up with this level here in Japan. The international solar cell price is becoming very cheap. The equipment cost is coming down, and we find that on the Japanese market as well. But in the case of Japan, we call this a soft cost. The construction cost is very high. That's because of the structure of the construction industry. We have a unique situation here in Japan, which has an impact.
My childhood and when I grew up in Europe, I was always taught that the Japanese were so efficient. Everything was made so effectively and at low cost. And now I'm here and I hear that you're not efficient in the construction sector. Sato-san, SoftBank has very efficient solar programs in India, for example. You should also know, what is the difference? Why is Japan more expensive?
Regarding the business in India, we have established SB Energy India to pursue that business. So to be honest, because of their strategy, they're able to enjoy lower cost. In Japan, the reason that costs remain expensive is, for example, as I earlier mentioned, capex is very high. But FIT system will be gradually phased out, and capex is slowly coming down. Going forward, even in Japan, lower cost will be possible to build a PV plant.
So Japan has something to learn from India, right? Mika, how would you explain it? Why is it more expensive in Japan? What would you say?
今やはり
As GEIDCO-san explained to us, the construction industry structure is part of it, and we have elucidated that in our studies as well. Another factor is related to population. Thomas, often you use this expression. There are various regulations in construction and also in approval or certificates, and so there is more time needed for construction, so that's contributing to the higher cost. But regarding a PV power generation, there's a conversion to 5 yen, according to one study. Concerning other power source, pathway for cost reduction has not been clear. Japan needs to introduce them in a larger scale. Otherwise, they may not be able to run it in the way that would result in lower cost. Now, offshore the wind, there's so much expectation, especially about the introduction of utility scale offshore wind. Likely to begin the bidding early, the 14, 15, the 16. People are talking about that. At the moment, it's 36 yen according to FIT. So there's going to be a reduction in the cost. Unless there are more of the facilities being built for power plants, we don't see the pathway. So first, it has to be investment friendly. There have to be a big picture in terms of the goal, and renewable energy has to have a business-friendly environment so that it would encourage more transactions of businesses.
Okay. Now I would like to give the opportunity to someone in the audience with a burning question to any of the panelists to pose that question. None? Oh, yes. Now we've got some.
I have a question
Okay.
to
Yes, please.
Obayashi Mika-san. I had a chance to talk with one of the major corporations in Japan, which is engaging the ocean energy. But they said that they already did the best. They cannot explore anymore. Then I couldn't believe it. But you said 900%. So I wonder, why can you say that? Which is right, I wonder.
海洋
marine energy company says that there's no potential for offshore wind. Is that right? Well, actually, there are things in plans that's up to 10 gigawatts. Japanese government's present target is 0.86 gigawatts, so it's a very small number. And Offshore Wind Association, according to them, offshore wind in shallow waters can have a potential of 91 gigawatts. And what I showed earlier is IEA technological potential. And the present state-of-the-art satellite photographs that shows the wind speed and the optimized turbine capacity utilization. That was combined to give these figures. So renewable energy cannot be seen. So you have to use it for it to become energy. That's different from uranium or fossil fuels. In this room, there are lots of natural energy sources. You have to use it. You have to introduce technology and technology innovation.
More questions somewhere there?
Good afternoon. My name is Dina, Asian Development Bank Institute. My question about investment of this infrastructure for interconnecting grids. What do you think should be a role of government investment and private investment? Can it be attract private investment, and whether government investment is needed?
Dimitri?
Well, I can say based on the European example, we had both. In some countries where basically the investment landscape, financial stability is lower than in others, the states, or even the European Union institution are guaranteeing and leveraging the investment. In others, where you have actually a more market-based recovering of the cost, most of the investment are made by the TSOs between the countries, and it is covered by the trading between basically the countries. So now, in this situation you're speaking about, I guess, first of all, the level of political integration is not as big as it is in Europe. So I guess the government-to-government cooperation is actually key to start any real then investment decision. Europe, we have built Europe over basically 60 years after the war, right? So the level of integration is politically and economically extremely strong. Maybe for East Asia, the priority is to build this basis first.
Do you have any questions to each other? Do you want to contradict something that someone else in the panel has said? Mika?
反対ではないんです。
Not really contradict someone else in the panel, but if possible, Dimitri and Doug, yesterday with Kyushu University, the collaboration, we had a symposium and Kyushu EPCO representative was there. How can we introduce a large amount of renewables into the grid? Because Kyushu EPCO is doing the curtailment. So Dimitri, Doug, any suggestions to Japan? I definitely wanted to ask you too these questions.
We had a very nice, actually, visit to the System Operations Center and a description of midday curtailment in Kyushu on certain days, not all days, but certain days. And the strategies, or maybe the tactics that they are using today, include using the solar to pump water for their pumped hydro system. And they, as Dimitri said, they actually ramp down their thermal generators quite strongly. But there are 2 or 3 pieces which are not part of the system, which we offered as ideas. One, of course, is to increase demand by looking at other options. This could be hydrogen, could be time of day solar hot water or water heating, could be advanced cooling technologies, other elements as well. It could be enhancing the grid interconnectivity to the rest of the 60 hertz grid. That was one. Turns out that there is a duplicate 500 kV line between the islands that is only sitting in reserve and not used actually, which could double the interconnection to, I think, 4 or 5 gigawatts, which could take all of the 1.9 gigawatts of solar, which is typically curtailed. And the last one actually is that economically or by rules, they are not allowed to ramp their nuclear facilities. So as Dimitri could say, in France, nuclear facilities are ramped relatively regularly on a daily schedule. And it's certainly technically possible, but by rules, they're not allowed to do that here.
Thank you. If we look at Europe as well as the United States, we have seen quite rapid growth of renewables, lowered electricity prices on the spot markets, and we have seen coal-fired power stations being closed. And in the US, I think some 500 coal-fired power stations in the last 10 years, and the 5 largest coal mining companies have gone bankrupt. In Europe, also several companies have lost a lot of money over the years. And it's obvious that the development of renewables is not really in the interest of those who own coal-fired power stations and nuclear power stations. I mean, I know I'm on the board of one of the power companies that have made impairments of 15 billion euros over the last 5 years. We did not go bankrupt, but it was painful. Sato-san, when you are now negotiating with these electric power companies in Japan and you want to sell more solar and wind and so on, are they treating you well or saying, thank you, outcompete us, please, so we can go bankrupt? Or do you have good opportunities, do you think?
It's very difficult to answer on behalf of the company. As a company, it's really hard to answer.
Okay. I take that they do not like to be outcompeted. Yeah, okay.
I will offer a question, I guess, to my other panelists, which is actually in light of the fact that there are forecasts for 150 or so gigawatts of solar and the potential for many hundreds of gigawatts of offshore wind. These are many more times the anticipated peak load for the country. And so do you see this as a real opportunity for doing cross-sector coupling and for renewables to provide, or for clean electricity from renewables to provide the opportunity to decarbonize other parts of the economy, including transportation, heating, cooling, chemicals, etc.? Where does that stand?
Then about solar power. From solar power perspective, I would like to address your question. 150 gigawatt by 2030, our scenario is that it's possible, and cross-sector coupling is included in our assumption. Solar in Japan going forward will shift from mega solar to distributed solar generation. That is our expectation, and especially the use in the building will be in combination with heat pump, and conversion to heat will be important. So energy solution to building can be offered, and the solar power operators will be able to build a new business model by offering services to buildings. As for operation, decarbonization of the operation, this is a very important challenge. And hybrid cars may be more popular these days in Japan than EV, but electric vehicles will have to be more widely accepted. This is something that we have to address. And when that becomes a reality, then because of a possibility of distributed generation of solar power, it can be EVs can also act as a source of energy by storage. IIPSV has a working group, and PV for transport is one of the working groups. This is a PV for transportation sector, and working group was just recently established. And Japanese NATO is one of the leaders, and with various countries, application of solar in transportation sector and development of a roadmap thereof is now underway.
In Europe, the idea of producing hydrogen from electricity is something that's very popular with power companies, I know, because it's also a way of avoiding electricity prices to fall too low. You can always produce hydrogen instead of selling electricity at less than 2 yen per kilowatt hour. And therefore, the established energy companies are very much involved in developing these other uses of electricity. Do you see anything of that in Japan, do you think? Mika?
As you know, hydrogen is one of the major policies by the current Japanese government. Unfortunately, in terms of the major movements from coal, creating hydrogen from coal, the other day, as you know, Toshiba is big on the research of hydrogen. I participated in the hydrogen workshop. With renewable energy producing hydrogen, those people who are doing this, using renewable energy gives them least cost. With that belief, they are expanding this business. NEDO and the Japanese government is actually going ahead with their research activities. But if you look at the Japanese EPCO, utilities, batteries, at the moment, I think their major interest rise is in batteries.
One last question. I hope it's short.
Yeah, hello. My name is Lawrence. I'm working for ARST, and I'm a long admirer of the whole move to renewable energy. I have one comment, maybe. So if we look at the sector coupling, then I think we have to realize in Germany we have now 42% renewable electricity, but of the total energy, it's just 13% renewable. So the challenge is extreme. On the other way, I was always thinking in Germany, we still heat our houses with oil, and we drive a lot cars quite a lot. So Japanese drive less cars, and they don't heat the houses. So maybe this could be a chance for a better transition. As finally, I think the energy comes from the sun, so it's PV or wind. Majorly. So I think maybe Japan could move if the utilities move.
Very good. An opportunity for improved living standards in the not so well heated Japanese houses. It was good it wasn't a question, because we would not have had time for an answer, because it's now 28 minutes past 5, and we're supposed to finish at 5:30, and I'm supposed to summarize everything before that. I suggest we give the panelists an applaud. And I would like to thank the panelists and the speakers of the day for keeping time schedules, as well as providing a lot of information. Maybe Mika was the most compact provider of a lot of information in a short time, but many did well. I hope that you in the audience have found the day fruitful, and that you bring something with you after this day that you did not know before you came. We have learned about decreasing cost of renewables, differences in cost between other parts of the world and Japan, something that is a challenge for Japan if the Japanese industry is to stay competitive and the living standard in Japan is to be kept at a good level in competition with other countries. We have learned that this is an opportunity for Japan. When costs come down, this can provide domestic energy, reducing the dependence on imported fossil fuels from the Middle East. And cooperation with neighboring countries can contribute to reduce the cost. And as long as it is a development of mutual dependence by exchanging renewable electricity, it will also be a way of stabilizing the relationships and realizing the economic and social benefits of cooperation. Let us hope that these important opportunities are being implemented and used in Japan, that SoftBank Energy succeed in all their ambitions in building more renewable electricity and interconnectors and contribute to this development, and that the policies that are creating costs in Japan are changed, and that the construction industry is learning from other parts of the world and building the solar and wind power plants as cheaply and efficiently as in the best countries in the world. With this, I would like to thank you all, and I would like to especially thank the interpreters who have served us during the day and done an excellent job as far as I have heard. And I welcome you all to some light snacks and drinks outside. Thank you all, and an applaud for the interpreters.
ありがとうございました。